I want to thank everyone who has joined me here this afternoon. This morning, Henry Schuelke, who is the independent counsel that was retained by Judge Emmett Sullivan to review the allegations of misconduct by the Justice Department team that prosecuted the late Senator Ted Stevens. The report was released this morning. This report was completed last November, but the release was delayed until today so that comments and objections of the Justice Department prosecutors that were named in that report could be heard. That report is about I think it's exactly 514 pages. People are still going through it at this time, but I think it is exceptionally important that that full report was made public so that we could all learn of the injustices that came about from that proceeding. Last November, when Judge Sullivan announced the completion of the report, he offered a little bit of a preview, and he said that the prosecution of Senator Stevens was, quote, permeated by the systematic concealment of significant exculpatory evidence which would have independently corroborated his defense and his testimony and seriously damaged the testimony and credibility of the government's key witnesses. At least some of the concealment was willful and intentional and related to the issues raised by the defense during the course of the Stevens trial. Those were the words of Judge Sullivan. The Justice Department's prosecution of Senator Ted Stevens, while he was seeking re-election, presented one of the most sensitive situations that could ever have faced a federal prosecutor. The Justice Department, as we know, has a duty to meticulously guard the constitutional rights of every defendant. The Justice Department breached this duty. They sat idly by while its prosecutors did all that they could to obtain a conviction with disregard for its constitutional obligations to ensure that the defendant received a fair trial. Instead of justice being blind, in this case, justice was blindly ignored. On April 29th of 2009, Judge Sullivan described in a letter how the Stevens verdict had unraveled, and he said, the Brady violations, which were revealed for the first time 5 months after the verdict, came to light only after an FBI agent filed a complaint alleging prosecutorial and other law enforcement misconduct. Then a new Attorney General took office, a new prosecutorial team was appointed to respond to the defendant's pretrial motions. Just this morning, I had an opportunity to ask Director Mueller about the role of that FBI agent who filed that complaint. I do hope that that individual has been appropriately recognized. Judge Sullivan asked in the Ninth Circuit, Judge Richard Tallman, to codify the Brady rule. The Justice Department aggressively opposed Judge Sullivan's proposal. The advisory committee then abandoned its efforts to consider reforms to the Brady rule. I think that the advisory committee, which is composed of judges, prosecutors, and defense lawyers, this is the place, this is the ideal forum to formulate changes to the Brady rule, but that call was ignored. So now it's incumbent on us here in Congress to ensure that justice is done out of respect for our friend, Senator Stevens, and for the sake of the constitutional system. This afternoon, I am introducing with Senator Hutchison, who is with me, the Fairness in Disclosure of Evidence Act of 2012. We are joined in this effort by Senators Inouye, Senator Begich, Senator Akaka, Senator Hutchison, as I've just mentioned. Our effort is endorsed by many of those behind me here, by the American Bar Association, the American Civil Liberties Union, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's been assisted by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Constitution Project. Simply stated, what our legislation does is calls upon the federal prosecutors to create a national standard for the disclosure of evidence that is favorable to the defendant, to disclose it as early as possible in the process, and to be aware that this is not an optional duty. Right now, in this country, there are 97 different standards that are used when it comes to the Brady rule. Moreover, the law makes clear that failure to abide by Brady obligations is a serious breach of the government's responsibilities, and it gives judges a broad range of remedies to address the Brady violations. And while the injustices that were done to Senator Stevens may have provided the impetus for the focus on this important issue, this bill is not about seeking vindication for Ted. It's about learning the vital lessons from the Justice Department's failure of his prosecution and making our criminal justice system work the way that our Constitution envisioned that it would.